Hello, hello, hello. Is this thing on? I've kind of forgot how to do these by now, but welcome back once again to the RetroBreak Podcast. Today I wanted to talk all about video game reviews and why I feel like they are kind of broken, because they definitely are. And I've got two very recent examples of why I think that is, as well as a few older games that people over on Twitter gave me as suggestions. And you may have noticed, if you're watching over on YouTube, that this one is actually audio only, and that is because I'm trying to push my Patreon a little bit more. So if you want video versions of this, if you want to see me actually talking, then please go ahead and check out patreon.com/retrobreak. There is actually a good reason that I'm doing this, and it's not just to try and make a bit of money. The main reason is that I didn't want these podcasts to be videos in the first place, and I feel like because I was recording these, I was showing things off to the camera, and that kind of breaks the whole purpose of having a podcast, because I know a lot of people listen to these either when they're commuting or when they're just walking around the house doing chores or something. So I'm trying to move away from actually showing things on camera in these podcast episodes to make it a bit more user-friendly for the audio listeners out there. But if you do want to see me, if you want to see me waving my hands around frantically as I try and explain all of these weird concepts that probably don't make a lot of sense to a lot of people, then please go ahead and check out Patreon and you'll see me waving right now. So thank you so much for the support, and now on with the episode. So I hope you all understand where I'm coming from with that. And anyway, let's get on with the topic at hand, which is why I think game reviews are broken. So the most recent example, and the one that I was really questioning whether reviews still mean much, was Sonic Frontiers. When that game came out, I saw everything from 1 out of 10 to 9 out of 10, and it's so weird that there was such a big range in terms of critic opinion on that game. And I did read a lot of those reviews as well to try and find out why that was. And I think I narrowed it down to a few different things. So the ones that were giving it high scores were pretty much all fans of the Sonic series to begin with, and everyone who gave it low scores either kind of thought of the series as kind of a meme at this point, and they all brought up things like Sonic 06 and Sonic Boom, which obviously that's kind of a red flag, because, you know, the series is a lot more than that, and they're just kind of parroting what they've heard elsewhere online. And the ones that were giving it 9 and 10 are obviously really big fans of the series, and they can overlook a lot of the quite serious flaws with the game, but you don't really get that range of different opinions just from one person. And I think that's where the main crux of the problem comes from, is the fact that reviews, at least the majority of reviews, are only made by one critic, and their opinions based on their prior experience with a game or series can hugely influence the gaming population. So I don't know, take a popular website like IGN, for example. They're known for their weird review scores, but they do have a lot of sway in the industry, and a lot of people, rightly or wrongly, buy games based on what they say. But it's all just down to the person who reviewed the game. So whoever reviewed Sonic Frontiers clearly doesn't like Sonic and gave it a low score. That doesn't mean that it's a bad game in the slightest, and people should really make up their own opinions about what's a good or bad game. But obviously that's not always possible. Games are expensive. You can't expect people to go out and spend 40, 50, sometimes even up to 80 quid on games these days. So people rely on reviews for those sort of balanced opinions, and I don't think people are getting that. Another recent example was Pokemon Scarlet and Violet as well. I've seen everything ranging from 2 to 10 out of 10 for that game, and it's the same kind of thing. The people that are giving it high scores understand the game has problems, but they're overlooking them almost completely in favour of it just being another game in one of their favourite series. Whereas the more scathing reviews, they're either fans of the series who feel like something's gone horribly wrong with Game Freak, which maybe it has, or they just don't get the appeal of Pokemon, but they're still employed to write these reviews, and they give it a bad score based on their own personal judgment, and they don't really have that context of the wider gaming landscape around the game. So it is really difficult, and sometimes that leads to big variations in scores. And if you look at something like Metacritic, it's just so weird. So let me tell you about an example that I found over on Metacritic. Here's probably the best example of why game reviews are completely broken. So if you remember, about 10 years ago, Sega came out with a game called Sonic 4 Episode 1, which was supposed to be a return to his 2D roots, but that game was plagued with issues. The designers didn't really know what made a good 2D Sonic game to begin with. The physics were completely broken on all accounts, and by pretty much every fan's account of that game. It's a completely broken game, and it honestly doesn't deserve any higher than about a 4 or 5. At least nothing more than completely mid to average reviews. But if you have a look over on Metacritic, and I did actually go through and read some of the critic reviews at the time for this game, the critics were maybe brainwashed by Sega, maybe because of the retro revival that was going on at the time. The average review score for Sonic 4 Episode 1 for the Wii on Metacritic is 81, which is just insane. So, a kind of bad game by all accounts, an objectively bad game. Also has critic reviews ranging from 4, 5 out of 10, all the way up to 10 out of 10. And then we look at Sonic Frontiers, which is the newest Sonic game, and a lot of the fans are really, really enjoying it. Hence the user reviews of 8.2, which is really, really good compared to, you know, what a lot of games get over on Metacritic. But the actual critic score for Sonic Frontiers at the moment only sits at 73. So do people really believe that Sonic 4 Episode 1 is 10 points better game than Sonic Frontiers? I don't think so, and I think that is where reviews are falling well short of the expectations that the actual people who play these games actually have when they get round to playing them, and it's just so strange. And another thing that I've got written down here, and another reason why I feel like reviews are even less important today than they used to be, is the fact that games these days get constantly updated with new content, with bug fixes and patches. There's loads of things that a reviewer might originally have found frustrating or challenging, and then they might be changed in a few months' time, but there's no way of the reviewer ever knowing that at the time. But the reviews don't get updated to reflect these new improvements made to the games over time. Well, I was about to give the example of No Man's Sky improving over time, but it seems like when the latest update came out, update 4.0, a load of fans actually went and review bombed the game. So when I started making this idea for a podcast, the user score was actually a lot higher than the Metacritic score, but now it's actually flipped completely. And that's another reason why review scores are kind of weird. The user scores can change on a dime. They can change based on the general consensus of the fans of a game or a series, but the critic scores mostly just stay frozen in time as soon as the game's been launched and all of the early reviews are out and the scores gets added to the site. So the review scores at the minute show a 71% Metacritic rating and only a 4.8 for user scores. So again, reviews are broken. It really doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I did put it out on Twitter saying that reviews are kind of messed up and they need fixing recently. And a lot of people came back to me and gave me some really good examples of games in the past that have also had wildly different receptions between critics and fans. So take games, I'm not going to go into specifics, but games such as Dark Souls 2 obviously is a very controversial game in the Dark Souls series, but critics at the time absolutely loved it, but fans generally think it's probably the worst in the series. The same goes for Dead Space 3. There was a lot of hype before that game came out and critics really fell for it, but fans were obviously not taken by the massive amounts of changes they made between the first and second game and the third one. The way they made it a lot more multiplayer focused basically ruined the whole point of the original two games for me personally, and for a lot of other people who really cared about the games, but the reviewers obviously didn't care that much. And there's other things as well. There's Banjo Nuts and Bolts. Obviously, the reviews were a lot better than what the fans kind of think about the game, although the opinion on Nuts and Bolts is kind of changing over time. And another Sonic example, going back to Sonic for a second, Sonic Unleashed as well. That was a game that went through a massive fan revival for a few years ago. So let's have a look on Metacritic for Sonic Unleashed and we can compare them. So let's go with the Xbox 360 version because that's generally the most popular out of all the original releases. So it has a Metacritic score of 60, mixed or average, based on 50 critic reviews. So it's quite a good pool of reviews to go from. And I remember at the time a lot of people were really disappointed in the game, but if you look at the user reviews, it has a user rating of 8.5, and I honestly think a lot of those are probably a lot more recent reviews, and the reason that I've seen that game is getting really popular again recently is because the people who grew up with Sonic Unleashed as a kid are now getting into their teens, into their early 20s, and they're looking back really fondly on that game, and that's kind of elevating the score and their opinion of it. And that might even sway where Sonic Team goes in the future because they've seen this outcry from fans. But at the time, the game was, for all intents and purposes, a kind of letdown, especially compared to what fans were expecting from the first trailers. When I asked on Twitter as well, something really interesting came through to me from my friend Kwang, and that was something that happened back in the 90s with the release of a game called Rise of the Robots. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of that game, and you're probably well aware that it's one of the worst games ever made. But back in the day, and this is something else that's wrong with reviews, which hopefully doesn't happen as much as it used to, reviewers were actually being paid by the game publisher and by the developers to actually say that the game was a lot better than it actually was. And they actually got the review codes early, whereas publications that hadn't signed up to this got the game on or close to launch day, which was too late for the consumers to actually see the true review scores. So things like that, things like blackmail or like kind of really shady business practices are also something that really does affect game reviews, and thankfully it doesn't seem to happen as much now as it used to. I know that it was either IGN or GameSpot got into a lot of trouble because people found out that their review of Kane and Lynch 2, I believe, was massively inflated because they were paid off by the publishers. And they had like adverts on their site and stuff, so they couldn't give it a bad score because they would fall out of popularity with that publisher and they might not get games in the future. There was a whole big thing around that, and I know some big reviewers have actually got in a lot of trouble for giving games bad scores that the publishers had a deal with them on. So it's things like that as well that make reviews kind of something that you can't always rely on. Although, like I said, I think things have calmed down on that front a little bit. Another thing that I thought of that is quite a good way of doing reviews, I think, is how the Japanese gaming magazine Famitsu does their scores. So they actually get 4 different reviewers to play each game, and then each of those reviewers actually rates the game out of 10 separately, and then they combine all of those scores to form the total at the end. And that is a much better way of getting a more rounded opinion. I mean, it still depends on whether those 4 people have already had prior experience with the game or series, but it is definitely better than leaving the whole thing up to just one person, which I get, not every company can actually do that or afford the time or the budget to be able to set 4 people off to review one game at a time. But it's just something to think about, and it is something that makes the reviews a bit more objective rather than just someone's personal opinion. I kind of like the way Edge did their reviews, where they give it a score, but they also say, if you like this game, then maybe you'll also like this other game, and you can kind of build up a picture of what sort of audience will like what sort of game through doing something like that. So maybe that's something that reviewers could do in the future, or maybe there really is no answer and it will just go on like this forever and fans will just review bomb games or just give them blindly 10 out of 10 because it's their favourite series. So I don't really know where to go from here. Reviews are broken. Let me know what you think, either on the podcast if you send in an audio response, or if you're over on YouTube, write in the description, or you can actually email me at retrobreakgames@gmail.com. Let me know what you think can be done to improve review scores, or just to improve reviews in general and give people a better idea of what they'll actually be getting themselves in for when they go and play a game that's kind of got mixed reviews like Pokemon or Sonic recently. Anyway, thank you for listening, and if you do want to watch this episode, please go ahead and check out patreon.com/retrobreak. I am going to be doing a lot more over there next year, so all of your support will be greatly appreciated, and you can also watch video versions of all these podcasts on there going forward as well. And I'll try to make this podcast a bit more frequent in the future, because I know a lot of you do enjoy listening to this, and I do enjoy making them as well, so I've got to try and find time for that. Anyway, that's all. Thank you guys, and I'll see you very soon for the next one. Goodbye.